When Cancer turns cold, it is not a simple shift in mood, nor a fleeting emotional chill. It is the thunderous silence after a tempest of devotion, the sacred retreat of a soul that has given more than it ever received. Governed by the moon, Cancer's essence is tidal, fluid, nurturing, responsive. But when the moon withdraws its light, the night becomes vast and impenetrable. This is not a detachment born of indifference. It is the armor forged in heartbreak, the shell thickened by betrayal, disappointment, or sheer emotional exhaustion. What was once soft becomes impenetrable, not because it no longer feels, but because it has felt too deeply, too fiercely, for too long. In this transformation lies a paradox. Cancer's coldness is not the absence of care, but the monument to how much it once cared. The warmth once extended like an endless summer is suddenly locked away, and those who were basking in its glow now face the frost of withdrawal. The intuitive wisdom of Cancer has detected imbalance, insincerity, or danger, and in response, it erects walls higher than any seen before. This coldness is not vindictive, it is protective. It is the soul's cry for self-preservation, the sacred pause before emotional ruin. The same heart that once made a home out of love now becomes a fortress, inaccessible even to those who once held the key. Astrologically, Cancer is a cardinal water sign, and water, while gentle in the stream, can become ice in the storm. This transformation is elemental. It is the water that refuses to flow until it feels safe again. Ruled by the celestial rhythms of the moon, Cancer mirrors the phases of emotional life. When wounded, it wanes. When disrespected, it hides. When overwhelmed, it retreats into silence so deep that it becomes a language in itself. To outsiders, this coldness may appear cruel, but to those who understand Cancer's soul, it is the consequence of emotional overextension, of loving until empty. Cancer's cold phase is also a call to self-mastery. It is the moment when the sign turns inward to rebuild its sacred interior. It is not the end of feeling, but the redirection of that feeling toward healing, reflection, and reclamation of sovereignty. No longer swayed by the tides of others, Cancer becomes its own anchor. The fierce loyalty that once tied it to people, places, and promises now binds it to its own evolution. The mother of the zodiac, when turned inward, becomes the guardian of her own rebirth. This icy transformation is, in truth, a necessary metamorphosis. It is the caterpillar in the cocoon, the winter before spring. The same moon that disappears always returns. So too does Cancer, but only once the inner world is restored. This period of emotional frost may be long, but it is filled with silent strength. In this stillness, Cancer sharpens its intuition, rebuilds its boundaries, and remembers its power. And when the time is right, the heart reemerges, not naive, not broken, but reborn through the very cold that once protected it. This coldness is, in fact, a sacred threshold. It is where the soul of Cancer sheds old skins, old roles, old illusions. It is where wisdom is crystallized from pain, where compassion is forged anew not from weakness, but from strength. The Cancer that rises after this phase is no longer merely nurturing. It is discerning. It does not offer its sanctuary to the unworthy. It does not pour its waters into broken vessels. Its love, once given freely, is now a blessing earned. Here lies the epic arc of the Cancerian spirit. It loves with oceans, it protects with fire, it freezes to survive. And yet, it never loses its essence. Even in silence, the moon continues its dance across the heavens. Even in cold, the heart of Cancer pulses with divine memory. This is the hero's journey of emotional alchemy, where vulnerability transforms into wisdom and tenderness. Once weaponized against it, becomes its greatest strength. What once seemed like a retreat is revealed to be a recalibration of divine power. Cancer's coldness is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of sacred alignment. It is the silent roar of a soul remembering its worth. It is the ancient knowing that true love does not require martyrdom. It is the moment the healer heals herself. And when the warmth returns, it is not because others demanded it, but because Cancer, in all her lunar glory, chose to rise again. When Cancer turns cold, There exists within that glacial quietude a cosmic intelligence few can comprehend. This is not simply an emotional response. It is an instinctual return to the origin of its element, to the ancient pulse of the ocean that bore the first whispers of life. Cancer is not only ruled by the moon, it is of the moon. Its soul is woven into the lunar tapestry of cycles, mysteries, and tides that govern not only water but memory, emotion, and time itself. Thus, when Cancer withdraws into its coldness, it is not detachment. It is a descent into the sacred womb of silence, where deeper truths are gestated. In its radiant warmth, Cancer gives without calculation. It nourishes others like sacred rain falling upon parched earth, often sacrificing pieces of itself to ensure others bloom. But this benevolence is not infinite. When it is not reciprocated, when the intuitive heart senses manipulation or neglect, Cancer's soul contracts, not from bitterness, but from sacred preservation. It is the ocean pulling back before the storm, gathering force in unseen depths. It is the moon going dark to reclaim its power. This coldness is not a failure of love, it is a refinement of it. Cancer, the keeper of ancestral wisdom, knows when the emotional ecosystem has become toxic. In freezing, it halts the spread of harm. In silence, it purifies what has been tainted. In withdrawal, it regathers its strength from realms unseen by those who live only on the surface. In this state, Cancer becomes the silent guardian of its sacred temple, allowing no entry to those who once took without gratitude. It builds thresholds, not walls, and waits not for permission, but for inner alignment. Astrologically, this phase corresponds to the waning moon, the descent into shadow, the moment where light dims to allow the soul to speak. Cancer's emotional intelligence is lunar, yes, but it is also Saturnian in this cold phase, disciplined, structured, and boundaried. Though often not associated with Saturn, Cancer carries the ancient echo of the Great Mother who knows when to nurture and when to say no. This is not cruelty. This is cosmic justice. In its coldness, Cancer becomes the priestess who closes the sanctuary to those who once entered with dirty hands. The hearth still burns, but it is veiled, waiting for worthy souls. This transformation is also deeply karmic. Cancer holds the lineage of emotional cycles passed down through generations. In its freezing, it often ends patterns that no one else had the strength to break. The silence becomes sacred work, an invisible revolution that liberates not just the self, but the ancestral line. The tears that once fell for others are now crystallized into armor made of ancient knowing. The emotional energy, once scattered across 1,000 acts of care, is summoned inward, becoming a blazing lunar fire that purifies the spirit and reshapes the soul. There is a sacred solitude in this coldness. Cancer becomes the mystic in the cave, the moonlit warrior in retreat. The absence of emotion is not emptiness. It is the presence of profound transformation. The psyche reweaves itself. The intuition grows sharper, honed by silence. The once reactive heart becomes a mirror, reflecting only what is true, what is honorable, what is whole. In this phase, Cancer learns the power of detachment not as a form of withdrawal, but as a path to liberation. This is not exile. This is sacred sovereignty. Cancer, whose love once flowed unceasingly like a river toward others, now becomes the still lake, deep, clear, and undisturbed by trivial winds. The emotional waters do not evaporate. They become still, waiting only for those who know how to honor them. This is not bitterness. This is discernment birthed from pain. The Cancerian soul remembers its value. No longer seduced by flattery or fooled by surface affection, it sees with the eyes of the moon, penetrating masks and illusions with ease. What once wounded now awakens. When Cancer reemerges from this phase, it does so transformed. The return is not a return to what was, it is an ascent to what has become. Its love is no longer given freely to all, it is offered as a sacred gift to the deserving. The radiant warmth returns, but now tempered with wisdom. The nurturing touch remains, but only for those who carry truth in their hearts. Cancer, reborn through frost, becomes unshakable in its truth. It no longer clings. It no longer pleads. It no longer explains its soul. It simply is, a luminous force of lunar wisdom, bound neither by fear nor by need. The coldness of Cancer is not the end. It is the liminal space between what was and what will be. It is the protective chrysalis before the return of the divine heart. Those who misunderstand this phase will say Cancer has changed. But the truth is Cancer has remembered. Remembered who it is beneath the weight of others' needs. Remembered what it feels like to choose itself. Remembered its power not just to nurture life, but to birth new beginnings from the ashes of emotional ruin. In this remembrance lies the epic redemption of the Cancerian path. No longer the silent martyr, Cancer becomes the sacred guardian of its own sacred fire. And when it returns to the world, it brings not just love, but radiance, boundaries, power, and truth. For the moon does not rise to be chased. It rises because it must. And in its rising, it reminds the world that even the gentlest among us carry storms of unfathomable strength. When Cancer turns cold, something ancient stirs deep within the emotional undercurrents of the zodiac's most intuitive sign. This coldness is not born of spite nor emotional immaturity. It is the echo of a soul that has wandered too far into the needs of others and now must return to its own inner sanctuary. It is the final defense of a heart that has offered itself in full bloom too many times, only to watch its petals trampled beneath the feet of the careless. It is the sacred pause before resurrection, the necessary severing of the umbilical cord that bound Cancer to people, patterns, and promises that no longer honor the sacredness of its spirit. While others may see withdrawal, the stars reveal initiation. In the celestial silence of Cancer's retreat, a greater story unfolds, one of deep cosmic remembrance. This is when Cancer stops being the caregiver to everyone else's wounds and begins to treat its own scars with the reverence they deserve. The coldness becomes a temple of reflection, a lunar cave where the echoes of past betrayals are not only heard but finally understood. Here, Cancer becomes the alchemist of its own emotional landscape, transmuting sorrow into sovereignty and heartbreak into holy fire. This transformation is deeply encoded in Cancer's cosmic architecture. Being ruled by the moon means navigating constant inner shifts, tides of feeling that others cannot always grasp. But when Cancer turns cold, it is not because the tides have ceased. It is because the ocean has gone still to preserve its strength. The moon does not abandon the night when it wanes. It merely prepares for another cycle of power. So too does Cancer dim its glow to protect its essence. This is the moment where passive energy becomes a force of silent revolution, where receptivity becomes the sword instead of the wound. In the silence of emotional detachment, Cancer discovers a new form of courage. No longer tied to approval, no longer craving validation from broken mirrors, it begins to see its worth through its own eyes. This is not the end of feeling. It is the beginning of emotional clarity. The fog lifts, the illusions crumble. Cancer's intuition, once fogged by the desires of others, sharpens like a blade. What was once soft becomes sovereign. What was once reactive becomes discerning. The psychic armor grows not as a prison but as a crown. There is also a sacred rage beneath Cancer's coldness, though it rarely shows its face. It is the rage of the divine mother archetype, the fury of compassion betrayed, of love taken for granted. It is not explosive, but it is absolute. It manifests in detachment that feels like exile to those who once depended on Cancer's endless giving. But this exile is not punishment, it is consequence. The soul can no longer tolerate disrespect. The heart no longer bends for those who never learned how to hold it. What feels like coldness to others is, in truth, Cancer's final act of love for itself. This phase also invokes a deeper spiritual awakening within Cancer. When stripped of external attachments, when the shell hardens and the warmth recedes, the soul begins to speak louder than ever before. Dreams intensify, visions clarify, the connection to the unseen world deepens. Cancer's inner priestess rises, no longer masked by the roles of caretaker or lover. The sign that once wept for others begins to channel divine messages. The once forsaken inner child becomes the guiding force. This is not isolation, it is divine communion. During this sacred coldness, Cancer also redefines its relationship to vulnerability. It is no longer a currency to buy affection or a weapon used against itself in the name of love. Vulnerability becomes sacred discernment, shared only with those who understand the language of loyalty and integrity. The soul becomes precise, refined, aware of energetic exchange. No longer giving out of compulsion, Cancer learns the deeper art of sacred preservation. Every gesture of care becomes intentional. Every emotional offering becomes a sacred act. In this state, Cancer no longer seeks rescue. It becomes its own healer, its own sanctuary, its own mother. The lunar warrior emerges. No longer passive, no longer caged by guilt or nostalgia, Cancer begins to move with purpose and prophecy. Every step is measured. Every word carries the weight of centuries of feeling. The sign once defined by emotional depth now embodies emotional mastery. Its tears, once misunderstood, now become symbols of strength. Its silence, once feared, now holds the wisdom of generations. When Cancer turns cold, it is walking through the underworld of its own psyche. But unlike others, it does not fear the dark. It is the dark. It knows the tunnels, the ghosts, the buried pain. It walks barefoot through ancestral grief and emerges radiant with truths no one else had the courage to face. This is not weakness, this is initiation. This is Cancer's soul stepping fully into its role as emotional oracle, guardian of sacred cycles, and divine keeper of intuitive justice. Eventually, warmth may return, but it will not be the same warmth as before. It will not be offered recklessly. It will not be given without reason. It will rise like the moon, on its own time, by its own rhythm, illuminating only what is worthy. Those who once knew Cancer in its giving phase will now meet it in its evolved form. Sovereign, intuitive, boundaried, and luminous. Not less loving, more powerful. Not less emotional, more precise. Not colder in essence, simply untouchable by anything that does not honor the divine within. This is the epic of Cancer's reclamation. The journey through frost and silence into the firelight of self-knowing. It is not a tragedy. It is a sacred rite. And those who witness it, those who have the privilege of seeing Cancer rise after coldness, will understand what true strength looks like when forged by love, guided by the moon, and protected by the unwavering loyalty of a soul who has finally chosen itself. When Cancer becomes cold, the transformation is not merely emotional. It is mythic, resonating with the cycles of cosmic rebirth and the ancestral pulse of the lunar archetype. To the untrained eye, this change may seem abrupt, even shocking, but to those who understand the sacred geometry of the zodiac, it is a return to origin, a reconsecration of energy long dispersed. The zodiac's most nurturing sign does not shed its warmth without reason. It does so only when the foundations of emotional trust have been broken, when the sacred current that once flowed freely becomes corrupted by neglect, betrayal, or imbalance. This is not abandonment of love. It is the preservation of love's true essence. This icy metamorphosis reveals the divine polarity that lives within Cancer. The cosmic dance between the mother and the warrior, between the healer and the guardian. Often perceived as soft or overly sentimental, Cancer carries within its archetype an ancient ferocity, one rarely seen unless the soul is pushed to the edge of its emotional threshold. In the coldness, this power awakens. The energy of the moon shifts from crescent to dark, and in that darkness, Cancer ceases to reflect the needs of others and begins to embody the unshakable resolve of lunar sovereignty. It becomes the tide that refuses to rise for those who once polluted its sacred waters. In the astrology of the soul, every sign contains both its gift and its crucible. Cancer's gift is unconditional love, intuitive understanding, and soul-deep compassion. But its crucible is the journey of learning to protect that gift with unwavering discipline. The cold phase is where this crucible becomes fire, a fire that burns not to destroy, but to purify. In this stage, Cancer becomes the gatekeeper of its own emotional temple, shedding the illusion that its purpose is to heal everyone at the expense of itself. This is where Cancer learns that love without boundaries is not healing. It is erosion. The epic dimension of this coldness cannot be overstated. It is a resurrection, a hero's descent into the underworld of feeling, where the soul confronts its own patterns, wounds, and illusions. The moon, after all, governs not just tides but memories, dreams, and the subconscious mind. When Cancer turns cold, it is often because its inner realm has been invaded or dishonored. The cold becomes a wall of ice around the sanctum of feeling, where sacred work takes place in solitude. This retreat is not escapism, it is preparation. Within that frozen silence, Cancer is reforging its emotional sword, aligning its intuition with higher wisdom, and reclaiming every fragment of power it gave away in the name of love. What emerges from this process is a being of extraordinary clarity and strength. Cancer is no longer the open hearth to all wanderers. It is the protected flame within the temple, only visible to those who come in reverence. In its coldness, it discerns what few can, feels what is unspoken. It sees through the veils of false affection. It no longer entertains the masquerade of superficial connection. Its energy becomes sacred currency, no longer spent on those who only take. This is the moment Cancer's intuition evolves from emotional intelligence into psychic precision. In this refined state, Cancer reclaims not just its emotional power but its destiny. It no longer defines itself by the roles others expect it to play: caretaker, empath, rescuer. It writes new roles, becoming the sovereign nurturer, the emotional seer, the guardian of energetic truth. The coldness serves as a cosmic filter, repelling all that is misaligned, all that is unworthy of the heart that once gave freely and now beats with discernment. Cancer does not cease to love. It learns to love with strategy, with intention, with inviolable self-respect. The mythology of the crab, often overlooked in modern astrology, holds deeper meaning here. The creature that moves sideways, appearing elusive, is in truth the master of indirect wisdom. It does not charge into battle like Aries, nor does it negotiate like Libra. Instead, it retreats, recalibrates, and returns when the time is right, with strategy, depth, and an unshakable will. Cancer's coldness reflects this sacred maneuver. It is not a flight from pain. It is the recalculation of path, the quiet gathering of soul force that will soon move mountains in silence. In the greater astrological symphony, Cancer's coldness reminds all signs of the importance of inner sanctuary. It teaches the value of emotional self-respect, the necessity of sacred boundaries, and the profound power of saying no when others expect a yes. It shatters the illusion that softness equals weakness. In truth, no sign holds greater inner might than Cancer in its frozen state. The same hands that once soothed now wield silence like a sword, not in malice but in honor of the divine order within. And though the world may misinterpret this coldness, thinking the heart has died or the soul has hardened, those who watch closely will see something else entirely. They will witness the quiet resurrection of a lunar force that has known every shade of feeling and now chooses only what aligns with destiny. They will feel the gravity of a soul that no longer seeks comfort but authenticity, no longer sacrifices but creates, no longer pleads but commands. Cancer, in this phase, becomes the moon itself, not just reflecting the light of others, but becoming the beacon by which others find their truth. It is a cosmic reminder that to turn cold is sometimes the most loving act one can do for the self, and in doing so, one becomes the channel through which true warmth can be reborn, not as obligation, but as liberation. The journey through emotional frost is not the end of feeling. It is the awakening of feeling as divine power. And when Cancer finally emerges, it does not return the same. It returns eternal. When Cancer becomes cold, it enters a dimension of existence rarely seen by others, a realm where silence holds the authority of thunder and stillness carries the weight of ancient oceans. This state is not merely emotional detachment. It is a profound spiritual recalibration guided by lunar wisdom that predates language, culture, and even human understanding. Cancer, whose core essence is shaped by the moon's sacred tides, knows intuitively when a cycle must close. The emotional warmth it once offered as an endless gift now becomes a flame tended only in the privacy of the soul's inner temple. This is a metamorphosis not of retreat, but of sacred transformation. In this state, Cancer activates its connection to the astral realms more intensely than at any other time. Governed by water, the element of intuition, dreams, and deep psychic memory, Cancer in its coldness slips into the archetype of the oracle. It begins to hear what others do not say, to see what others have hidden, even from themselves. The noise of the world fades, and what remains is a crystal clarity sharpened by pain, honed by solitude, and crowned with lunar fire. This sharpened perception, often misunderstood as aloofness or detachment, is in truth a return to the original frequency of the soul. This phase also initiates a powerful reconnection with Cancer's deep-rooted ancestral lineage. Cancer holds dominion over heritage, over family and roots, not only in the biological sense but in the spiritual architecture of lineage across time. When Cancer turns cold, it is often the echo of countless lifetimes spent overgiving, overloving, and overextending for the sake of others. This is the soul remembering the cost of martyrdom and choosing, in this incarnation, to break that cycle. The silence becomes a generational exorcism. The chill becomes a cleansing wind. Through this quiet revolution, Cancer liberates not only itself but every soul bound by similar patterns in its bloodline. This is where Cancer's coldness evolves from an emotional defense to a cosmic declaration. No longer a reaction to pain, it becomes a ritual of rebirth. The emotional detachment grows into an energetic sovereignty so powerful it becomes a beacon to others who are learning to draw the same lines, who are reclaiming their own right to be sacred. The cold becomes holy. It becomes the threshold through which only truth can pass. It separates illusion from essence, purifies the field. Cancer, once the empath absorbing everything around it, now becomes the architect of energetic clarity. It no longer reacts, it chooses with precision what it will allow near its waters. There is a quiet majesty in this stage of evolution. Cancer begins to operate more from its upper chakras, channeling its lunar force not only into feeling but into vision, creation, and prophecy. What once felt like emotional vulnerability becomes spiritual might. The Cancerian spirit does not lose its sensitivity. It refines it, aligning it with divine will rather than human need. The emotions remain, but now they serve as guides instead of shackles. The heart remains open, but it is protected by discernment woven from countless nights of introspection beneath stars that speak in symbols and silence. As the moon pulls tides across oceans, so too does Cancer in its coldness begin to move reality itself through unseen forces. The world begins to adjust around it. People who once took advantage disappear without confrontation. Energies that were draining fall away as if dissolved by an invisible field. The very environment begins to reflect this transformation. Cancer's presence becomes more than a person. It becomes a frequency, a field of sovereign calm that others can sense but not easily penetrate. This is the invisible throne, the quiet crown, the power that does not need to be announced because it is embedded in every breath, every glance, every step forward. In this state, Cancer is no longer the vessel of emotion for others. It becomes the mirror in which others must face themselves. This is not cruelty, it is evolution. The soul no longer masks its depth for the comfort of others. It no longer conceals its light to soothe fragile egos. It no longer waters down its essence to maintain connection. Cancer in this form becomes the embodiment of the sacred feminine in its most exalted vibration. Mystical, untouchable, protective, intuitive, and commanding. It ceases to plead and begins to summon. It ceases to follow and begins to lead. And yet, even in the midst of this epic transformation, the emotional memory remains. The love that once bloomed in every gesture is not gone. It is transmuted. It becomes the golden seed of creation, waiting to be planted in soil worthy of its depth. Cancer's coldness is not the end of intimacy. It is the filtration of it. From this place, Cancer can now offer love that is empowered, sovereign, and uncompromising. Love that heals because it no longer sacrifices the self. Love that blesses without breaking. Love that flows not from a wound but from a wellspring of cosmic truth. This is the legacy of the lunar soul. Not just to feel but to evolve feeling into wisdom. Not just to nurture, but to embody the sacred force behind nurturing. Not just to remember love, but to redefine it. Cancer's journey through coldness is a sacred rite of passage into the realm of divine emotional mastery. It is the burning away of illusions in the frost of clarity. It is the moment when the moon herself ceases to reflect and begins to shine from within, no longer a mirror of others, but a sovereign star reborn in her own sky. When Cancer turns cold, it becomes a guardian of its own sacred inner temple, and in this rare and misunderstood metamorphosis, the soul undergoes a silent revolution that few will ever witness, and even fewer will truly comprehend. This is not the result of emotional fatigue alone, but of a deeper, soul-level awakening. It is the moment when the tides no longer crash endlessly against shores that do not reciprocate their rhythm. The very nature of water changes when pressured. It either becomes steam and ascends or ice and preserves. Cancer, as the embodiment of elemental water, responds to sustained neglect, dishonesty, or spiritual misalignment not with destruction, but with crystallization, an alchemical pause that prepares the emotional body for transformation beyond what the surface mind can predict. In the celestial design, Cancer is not only the nurturer of the zodiac, it is the sacred keeper of lunar memory, a vessel through which the mysteries of past, present, and future flow together in sacred silence. This sign remembers not only what has been done, but what was meant, what was felt, what was concealed beneath action. When Cancer turns cold, it is because that sacred memory has been bruised too deeply. Not because the sign cannot forgive, but because it cannot continue to betray its own truth. It is a sign that feels in chords, not notes, and when the music becomes dissonant beyond repair, Cancer chooses not to scream or rage, but to fall into silence, a silence that reverberates like thunder in the unseen. The process of emotional retreat is not merely psychological. It is energetic, archetypal, mythic. Cancer withdraws from the external world to realign with its internal cosmos, to remember the celestial codes buried beneath the personality, beneath the expectations placed on it, beneath the old stories that demanded endless sacrifice. This withdrawal is the call of the soul to itself, the return to the inner shore where the emotional oceans were first formed. Here, in this sacred stillness, Cancer does not merely survive. It redefines itself in the language of the stars. It communes with the moon in her purest form, without distraction, without distortion. It remembers its lineage as the holder of sacred emotional wisdom, and from that remembrance, power begins to rise. There is a profound restructuring that takes place in this coldness, an inner reordering of loyalty. The loyalty that once flowed outward, often without question, begins to flow inward. This is not selfishness, it is sacred justice. The emotional energy once given so freely to those who could not receive it is now redirected into healing, into building, into vision. Cancer begins to see what it could not see before, begins to dream in new directions, begins to hear the voice of its higher self unclouded by the noise of other people's needs and projections. This is the birth of emotional sovereignty. The crab, once clutching what it loved with protective claws, now learns to release with grace, understanding that not all who are loved are meant to be kept. In this glacial phase, Cancer's energetic frequency shifts entirely. The sign becomes less about fusion and more about vibration. It no longer tries to merge. It resonates, it attracts, it aligns. People feel this shift, often without understanding it, and are drawn in not by what Cancer gives, but by what Cancer is. The sign no longer explains, justifies, or defends its heart. The heart becomes a force field, vibrating with ancestral depth and lunar discipline. The aura of Cancer in this phase can command without words, inspire without effort, and awaken others simply by being. The emotional waters, once scattered in 10,000 directions, are now held in a sacred chalice, offered only to the deserving, and only when the time is right. The very archetype of Cancer as mother begins to evolve. It is no longer just the mother who nurtures others, it becomes the mother who births herself. In this coldness, a new version of the self is gestated, one that is not reactive, not codependent, not entangled in cycles of emotional rescue. This self is carved from silence, shaped by stillness, and crowned with the knowing that love is most powerful when it is no longer afraid to choose itself. The external world may misread this as detachment, as distance, But Cancer no longer lives to be understood by those who do not listen with their soul. The validation that once seemed essential now fades like mist under moonlight. What remains is essence, pure and unshakable. This transformation aligns with the deeper lunar cycles that rule Cancer's soul. Just as the moon wanes to darkness before she blooms once more in light, so too does Cancer embrace the necessary emptiness before full return. This emptiness is not a void, it is a sanctuary. It is where the new blueprint is written, where the outdated emotional contracts are burned, where the soul signs a new covenant with the divine. The coldness, then, is not a pause in love. It is a deepening of love's meaning. It is the end of illusion, the burial of dependency, the death of self-betrayal. What returns from this is not the same heart. It is a new force of nature. From this rebirth, Cancer learns how to wield emotional power not just as a response to others, but as a creative tool, a weapon of beauty, a flame that warms without burning out. The compassion remains, but it is mature, empowered, discerning. The love remains, but it is self-sustaining, no longer hemorrhaging in the presence of those who cannot meet it. Cancer, often underestimated, often misunderstood, now takes its rightful place as one of the most powerful archetypes in the zodiac. Not because it fights, but because it remembers. Not because it hardens, but because it heals. Not because it needs to be seen, but because it has learned to see itself. The emotional frost, far from being a failure or weakness, becomes the crystal prism through which light bends into new dimensions. Cancer learns to speak less, but when it does, its words shift realities. It learns to touch less, but when it does, it awakens something sacred. Its presence becomes a sanctuary for truth, and its silence a mirror in which others confront themselves. This is the miracle of the cold Cancer. Not a sign that has lost love, but a sign that has claimed it, transformed it, and learned how to hold it with the reverence of the moon herself. And when Cancer finally steps forth from this inner sanctum, its eyes no longer search, they shine. Its energy no longer pleads, it radiates. Its love no longer chases, it calls forth the destined. This is not the return of the same being, but the emergence of something holy, ancient, and undeniable. In the stillness of the cold, Cancer becomes eternal.